National Association of Local Government Environmental Professionals, or NALGEP. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar focused on the White House Manufacturing Communities Partnership. Next slide, please, Laura. And for those of you who don't know us, just to remind you, NALGEP is a national organization that represents the nation's leading city and county environmental managers. And we coordinate a network called the Brownfield Communities Network, which is focused on helping communities revitalize and clean up contaminated properties, exchanging best practices, sharing information, and providing technical assistance. Next slide. We have well over 2,000 leaders across the country that are part of the network from diverse sectors, including the private sector, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, and government. We focus on overcoming barriers to brownfields revitalization by convening experts, preparing white papers, and helping to educate key decision makers across the country. And we provide technical assistance and share lessons learned through regional workshops, national conferences, and webinars like today's. Next slide. Special thanks to NALGEP sponsors who are here, located here. Next slide, please. And today we have a great program. We're focused again, back up please, there you go. We're focused on the Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership. This is an effort led by the White House and multiple federal agencies, including EPA, and EPA has been playing a leadership role in this effort. As folks know, one of the administration's priorities and the nation's priorities is to revitalize manufacturing and bring back manufacturing jobs in this country, and the partnership is designed to enhance that. The agenda for today's webinar, we're going to first hear from Maddie Stanislaus, who's the Assistant Administrator at EPA for the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response, where he's responsible for Superfund, brownfields, and other land revitalization programs. And then we'll also hear from Charlie Barch, who is a special assistant to Assistant Administrator Stanislaus. Following their remarks about the partnership, we will then have a panel discussion featuring community leaders from around the country, who I will introduce a little later, but you can see their names here. And then we'll have time for questions from the audience. And you can type your questions in the question box in the panel, and we'll be able to see your questions and pose them to both Maddie Stanislaus and the rest of our panelists. So with that, we're going to move right into the program. I'm pleased to introduce Maddie Stanislaus. Maddie was appointed by President Obama back in 2009. Again, he heads up the key EPA solid and hazardous waste programs, including all of the land revitalization programs and the brownfields programs. He's provided tremendous leadership. He's an innovation. He's some of his new strategies. One is this initiative. He is made sure that EPA has been a key partner in the Manufacturing Communities Partnership. He initiated the area-wide planning grants. He's initiated the multi-purpose grants pilots, and has done a tremendous job in leading our programs at EPA. So Maddie, we're pleased to have you with us as always, and we're looking forward to learning more about the new Manufacturing Communities Partnership.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. So let me first start off with what the genesis of this initiative is. talk about EPA's role, and then talk a little bit about the specifics of the initiative itself. You know, as the President has articulated, a tremendous way of creating jobs in this country and creating a vibrant middle class and revitalizing communities around the country is through manufacturing. We are really pushing forward with the leadership of the President, the National Economic Council, Gene Sperling, who is heading that, working with a number of federal agencies. And some may ask, well, why is EPA involved in this? You know, and a couple of the reasons that EPA has been leading this effort is one of the most significant examples of expanding manufacturing and new manufacturing actually has occurred in former manufacturing sites like former automobile sites. So some of this initiative was really formed by some of the experiences working with local leaders trying to transition some of the former auto manufacturing, auto assembly sites to future manufacturing. I'll work with local leaders in terms of putting together a set of tools, everything from technical assistance to targeted solicitation, making sure that everybody planning accommodate manufacturing. So that experience, along with the experience of a number of agencies, including Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration, led to the President creating this investing in manufacturing community partnership. You know, and what that is to really develop a strong federal partnership to align federal economic development resources, help localities to make coordinated long-term investment to advance manufacturing, and this could be everything from infrastructure to the critical aspect of job training, regulatory clarity, everything that goes into making manufacturing more a competitive climate in the United States. Now, the one thing I would observe, and I think Gene Sperling has talked about it a lot, is we are right now at a tipping point with respect to manufacturers insourcing from abroad or making a decision between siting in the United States or in India or China or even in Europe. And so because of a combination of wage rates, energy rates, some of the interesting observations of proximity between research and development and manufacturing, and the cyclical nature of product adjustments of that close proximity has led many in the manufacturing field to say, well, U.S. is suddenly in the mix as choices when you can consider all of the other factors. So we want to really take advantage and provide as many tools to really advance that. So some of the things that we've been doing specific to the EPA is we have the area-wide planning program, and that program is designed to provide tools to local communities to comprehensively look at the opportunities of a brownfield site, particularly a former manufacturing brownfield site, and really to reveal all of the assets, the hidden assets of these sites, conduct infrastructure studies, conduct market studies to determine a comprehensive plan of revitalizing that site and promoting reuse of that site through manufacturing. So a subset of our area-wide planning grantees are actually formally in or as part of this partnership. So to date, what we've done is we've held a series of listening sessions, we meaning EPA, SBA, USDA, Department of Labor, Economic Development Administration, / Department of Commerce. And in those roundtables, we've wanted to, one, raise awareness of the funding opportunities, try to talk to the kind and the needs for technical assistance strategies, and we did a first phase of implementation grants, we meaning EDA, issued a series of grants in September. SBA similarly did some grant resources, and EPA through the last round of area-wide planning grants. We're now into the second phase, and there are a couple of components to that. We're on December 10th, Economic Development Administration announced challenge grants to designate up to 12 manufacturing communities using the concept of a challenge grant. Now, these selected communities will be eligible for preference and priority consideration for implementation resource, and I'll get into that in a moment. It'll also lead to a single federal point of contact and a centralized access point for agency information and resources, and what we're calling a playbook of federal planning and technical assistance resources. The next thing we're doing is to really operationalize this concept of preference and priority that many have been speaking about. And at its heart, it's to align federal economic development resources in a more intelligent way, and to deliver that to communities who have done the hard work up front, have done the planning work up front. So the beginning point is the alignment of the Tiger Grant with some of the other area-wide planning efforts of the federal government, including the area-wide planning effort. So we have identified about $1.3 billion of economic development resources. There's $1.3 billion among 35 different programs, and what we're in the midst of doing is trying to determine how we could bring to bear those resources to advance manufacturing. And those resources include, with respect to EPA, the assessment, cleanup, revolving loan fund grants, some of our assistance to advance clean energy on contaminated properties, our E3 program, DOT's Tiger Grants and Construction Skills Training Program, HUD's Delta and Integrated Planning Investment Grants, Department of Commerce Select USA Grants, SBA's Accelerator Program, and a number of training support from Department of Labor, Department of Energy's Clean Energy Company Incubation Program, DOD's Economic Income Adjustment Program. So the intention of identifying this and trying to determine how we can provide that in a preference and priority way to advance manufacturing projects is to enable the selected manufacturing communities some preference and priority for those resources to implement the manufacturing uses. So the applications of EDA is due on March 14th. And some of the key things is there existing manufacturing base? Is there a plan for advancing manufacturing? You know, what's the linkage between the core manufacturing and supply chains and the various collaborative partners? So with that, let me stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Barsh to walk through some of the details of the Federal Register notice.
Well, thank you, Maddie, and it's good to be on the call. And you know, I know a lot of old friends are on this. This is very nice. Let me just mention, you know, Maddie has asked me to represent EPA, and the work group at Commerce as the Federal Register notice is being put together, and that was, as he said, was announced on the 10th of December. And just to give you a little sense as to what's in there, we're working closely, and in fact, tomorrow we've got a meeting at Commerce, a work group meeting, to start really fleshing out the selection process. And I guess I want to take this opportunity to urge all of you on the call, if you have technical questions that we're not able to answer today to get those into Ken and NALGEP, and they can forward them to us, and I can get them to Commerce and get some answers for you. But basically, as May said, the whole idea of this was to really help communities prepare themselves to receive new manufacturing activity, and that's in communities that have an existing base, have identified their ideas, have a plan in place, and have identified a number of partners to advance that effort. So applicants in this process are going to need to show a number of things, and we can start going through these slides. We can get to the next one. Just run through sort of the major categories of what applicants are going to have to demonstrate. They're going to have to provide an assessment of what Commerce is calling their local industrial ecosystem as it currently exists. Again, the factors that Maddie talked about, infrastructure, R&D, workforce, availability of sites, availability, of players and institutions to advance site preparation. Identify what's in place and what gaps there are. Applicants are going to have to make, based on that definition of their industrial ecosystem situation, they're going to have to, suggest what they need to, really expand further plans to really get plans implemented. And to that extent, they're going to have to identify strategies that would lead to some sustainable investment, some land recycling, leverage, partnerships, and also disciplinary integration. I mean, this initiative has been designed as a multi-agency effort, and that disciplinary integration is going to be a key piece of this. And if we go on to the next slide, applicants are also going to have to, show that they've got the capacity to do what they propose. That'll be everything from leadership capacity to, sort of a sound and appropriate partnership structure, a clear delineation of who's going to do what, the partner responsibilities, and certainly something that we have pushed at EPA, evidence of participation and buy-in from community groups and nonprofits. So this, this really does need to be a genuine community-wide, region-wide effort to promote manufacturing. If we go on to the next slide, a key piece of what EDA is going to be looking for is going to be the commitment from existing and prospective partners in this. We certainly brought to this effort really what a lot of you are familiar with. I guess I call our brownfields model, where when you have to demonstrate commitment, you really do need, letters of support that detail the commitment and sort of, pledge what can be done, and those commitments will be, we'll be looking for commitments from your prospective private investors, potential companies who may locate in an area, from community and labor organizations who may want to partner, from different levels of government, regional finance authorities, other entities. And again, a lot of the same kinds of players that are on this call now and that have really been strong, sort of intergovernmental public-private partners in the whole brownfield redevelopment process in many places. And so that's really the key pieces of this. I mean, the last slide, just to kind of wrap up the slide deck, I mean, EPA is really committed to doing what we can to spread the word about this initiative, to talk about the opportunities of, cross-agency cooperation, in the name of community revitalization and job creation. And so this webinar is certainly, indicative of one of the things that we're going to do. We're doing a workshop in Lowell, Massachusetts in February to talk about this. Other agencies will be doing, events and activities, and we will be participating in those as we're asked to do so. So I think with that, Ken, I think, Maddie and I have kind of laid out what we wanted to get out to the group, and we'll look forward to the next part of this.
Great. Thanks very much, Maddie and Charlie. That's a great overview. Again, a couple of things, the slides and the presentation from today, as well as the recording, will be available on the NALGEP website following the presentation, www.nalgep.org. Also, please feel free to type your questions in the question box, and we will get to them. But what I'd like to do now is we have a stellar panel of community leaders from around the country, from different communities, who are working on manufacturing and many have been doing it for many years in their communities. And we're going to have a brief discussion to give you all some ideas on some of the challenges folks are facing and as well as some of the strategies that they're employing in their communities. So let me briefly introduce our panel. First of all, we have Jeremy Cooney, who is the Chief of Staff to the new mayor of Rochester, New York, whose name is Lovely Warren. We have Tim Kananashu, and Tim is the Executive Vice President of Revitalize and Develop East Moline in East Moline, Illinois. We have Lori Lauder, who's the Senior Vice President for Business and Intergovernmental Affairs for the St. Paul Port Authority in St. Paul, Minnesota. And of course, I must mention that Lori's a board member from NALGEP and has been a long-term leader on brownfields and many other issues and a big asset to our organization. And we have David Miskey, who's the Assistant Executive Secretary of the Redevelopment Authority for the City of Milwaukee. So we got a great group of people with a lot of experience. So I'm going to start off with a question for all of you and let Tim Kananashu from East Moline start us off. The question is, what are the biggest challenges your community faces in accelerating the resurgence of manufacturing? So Tim, if you want to give us a start there.
Certainly, I'd be glad to do that. We have our local Chamber of Commerce. It's a bi-state regional group that has a ongoing program called Business Connections. And so some of the things that I'm going to discuss have come out of the meetings that we've had with our local businesses. But some of the challenges would include a workforce with the appropriate level of education, knowledge, and skills. Fiber and broadband connectivity in terms of the capabilities and where it actually exists. The general business climate, including laws and regulations, is something that may inhibit development in terms of manufacturing and other businesses. Charlie Barch talked about the importance of a site, and that the next several items that I'm going to discuss list some of the shortcomings that need to be addressed in any plan or development. And those would include the lack of a pad-ready or certified site, that if you can put something together that is actually going to meet the needs of a manufacturer or other business that wants to locate in your area, that makes it a lot easier to actually get them through the door. The existence of environmental conditions of a possible site or sites that require remediation, depending upon if you're going to replace manufacturing where manufacturing used to be, that's always an issue that needs to be addressed. The lack of infrastructure in place for development, such as water and sewer, other utilities. Not having appropriate transportation service for a site or business, such as rail, barge, shipping, or air access, or other areas that need to be addressed. And then the lack of appropriate incentives for investment of capital or for workforce training are some of the other things that are challenges in terms of accelerating the resurgence of manufacturing. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure other people have some ideas.
Thanks, Tim. Jeremy Cooney from Rochester, you want to let us know what's going on in Rochester and some of the challenges you all are facing there?
Absolutely. So for those on the call, when you think of Rochester, New York, you probably don't think of lots of sun and warm temperatures, but you probably also think about Kodak and Bosch and Lomb and Xerox, which were all primary manufacturers and corporations based at one time in Rochester. Kodak continues to be a major player, but it's not the same that it was a number of years ago. So just a little bit of perspective on Kodak specifically. You know, we have seen in Rochester and in the city of Rochester specifically a significant workforce decline. So in 1982 is a good example, which was the peak of Kodak's leadership in Rochester. There were 60,000 employees, and now there's less than 500 employees in our area. 40,000 jobs were lost in the metropolitan area between 2000 and 2010. 40% of those jobs were in manufacturing. And I'm sure this scenario is not too unfamiliar to many of you on the call. And some of the barriers and obstacles that we're facing, challenges that we're facing, are probably similar to what you might see in your community. Just to kind of run through a few of them, in Rochester specifically, the three that jump to mind are, of course, capital requirements for technology based on manufacturing equipment, are pretty large. And so access to that capital and financing for that capital is difficult, specifically for early-stage businesses who are looking to start up. New York is a wonderful state to live in, but we're also known for our high taxes and government regulations, which really impact local business climate. Income taxes, property taxes, utility costs, insurance costs, regulatory costs, all of these really make it a poor business tax environment for investment. And then workforce issues. Kevin Kelly is the executive director of the Rochester Technology and Manufacturing Association, the RTMA. And Kevin is constantly saying, that we have a chronic shortage of skilled labor in Rochester. Companies who are perhaps interested in Rochester cannot fill their job openings because of a lack of students interested in jobs of manufacturing or a reskilled workforce. And then finally, some of my other comments I think today will focus on a new initiative we're working on, but I do want to say that there is a lack of modern and efficient manufacturing space available to local companies or new companies that are trying to move into Rochester. So those are some challenges that we face in the wake of a changing economy with the disappearance of such large manufacturers such as Kodak.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And how about David Miskey? From Milwaukee, you want to offer your thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Again, Dave Miskey. I'm with the city of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. And in Milwaukee, we have a saying here, and it's generally been attributed to one of our directors of our Regional Economic Development Organization, and that is, his name being Jim Page, and that is that manufacturing is in our DNA, that in Milwaukee we are known for a number of things, but primarily we're built for manufacturing, and that had a lot to do with historically with the immigrants who moved here 150 years ago or so. It had a lot to do with what where our city is physically located alongside Lake Michigan. We're also built on 3 rivers, so a lot of types of industries were created or were started here back in the 1800s, early 1900s, including foundries and breweries, as you might expect, with Schlitz and Blatz and Miller. And so there were also tanneries, a lot of things that used water, and it became a heavy component to our industry and our industrial past. And yet we still hang on to a lot of that industry. And we currently are one of the top 2% for overall economy, with having manufacturing being about 16% of our overall economy. So it's gone down over the years, but it's really stabilized over the last 10 years or so at about 16%. But yet we still have a number of challenges, and these are challenges that Tim touched on primarily, and Jeremy hit a couple of them as well. But our biggest challenges, and I'll keep them few because they have mentioned them, but I just want to reiterate that a trained workforce is one of those things that will be a struggle for us. We have, as I mentioned, a lot of manufacturing in our community. We have historically a lot of employees who were trained in manufacturing but have been unemployed or underemployed for the last 10, 15 years, but yet are still employable. And so getting those individuals up to a level that makes them to a level that's appropriate for the new manufacturing that would enter our economy is something that we need to really focus on. Another thing that Tim focused on or mentioned was the infrastructure. We, as I mentioned, a lot of the industry is built up along rivers' edges, but they also were built up along rail. And the infrastructure in the rail side of things in our community has been lacking. The investment that's been made has been very little, and it's something that our community is really focused on and working with the state of Wisconsin and the federal government in trying to improve that infrastructure linkage between our port and the manufacturing businesses. So those are two main things, the trained workforce and the infrastructure. But the final thing I want to just mention is automation. And I think Jeremy touched on this a bit in that we have a lot of industry here. They're not all employing 500 or 1,000 people. Many of them are small operations, but yet they manufacture and very critical to our supply chain. And yet they're lacking in automation and in upgrading their infrastructure or their own infrastructure. And I know Jeremy mentioned the capital for that, but it's also getting those companies, those small mom and pop operating businesses, to really invest and reinvest in their operations to allow them to grow. So with that, there's a number of other smaller items, but I just wanted to touch on those at this point.
Great, thanks, Dave. Next up, Lori Lauder from St. Paul, Minnesota.
Hi, everyone. Wanted to mention a few things in answer to this question. One is just in the big picture, wanted to share with you that we had a study done about 1.5 years or so ago by Dr. Michael Porter's group out of Harvard, and he formed a research group about 20 years ago called the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City, the ICIC organization. And they found, bottom line, after working for about 8 months on this study, which is the St. Paul, Minnesota industrial study, that St. Paul has some valuable industrial assets, but they're underappreciated, and we're lagging behind about 20% of growth or in growth based upon what we should be doing. So that's the big picture challenge. And I wanted to move from that to say that one of the key challenges, of course, is land availability. When we talk about the results of this ICIC study, and we've made over 150 PowerPoint presentations to all sorts of elements within the community, the grassroots folks, residents, foundations, the business community, and so forth, we say this. We say it's all about the dirt, because we need more dirt, more land that's reclaimed, which I'll talk about later as well in this conversation on another question, to be able to sell to growing manufacturers and other industrial customers. So that's a second thing that's at issue here. Thirdly, we also need more resources, and we continue to be extremely grateful for the technical and financial help we've gotten from EPA and other entities over the years for this. But as we all know, when we identify industrial lands that are brownfields and other type lands as well that other entities identify, it's all about bringing those defective and contaminated lands to the marketplace so that they can be provided and that they're marketable and developable. And of course that process involves many things, just a few being the engineering prep. When one identifies a site, we get in the chain of title, so it's an acquisition process, and without eminent domain much at all, that's its own challenge, I think, in this process. And of course site preparation, demolition, and site grading and new infrastructure and so forth. And so that comes down to a lot of environmental pieces as well, characterizing the site, analyzing the contamination, and providing the appropriate reports to the State Pollution Control Agency, and then, of course, the cleanup costs. So that whole process needs continued capitalization from all appropriate sources. Without that, we don't have production. And manufacturing cannot expand as fast, as well, and as they could, and of course then we lose growth opportunities. Fourth section I wanted to mention is workforce, matching up available workforce with manufacturers that need certain categories of trained labor. One of the other things that we thought we knew, and the ICIC group did confirm this, and that is that there are really low barriers to entry to manufacturing jobs. And that means that with a high school diploma, with a 2-year college degree. We have a college here that has just been ranked first in the nation, and that is the St. Paul College, which is a technical school. With a 2-year degree from there, we have found, and through some deeper study of the ICIC group, that the barriers are low, but the connections need to be better. And so one of the challenges that we face is needing to better connect quite a number of training community folks, so nonprofit training groups, a couple of profits, but mostly nonprofit, that do training in particular areas, and we need to coordinate them better to bring them into the mix and to bring in these 2-year colleges into the mix so that then effectively that connection will ultimately, we think, be able to address manufacturers' need on a case-by-case basis. And I think we all know when we're working with various manufacturing companies and they need land, it's land, labor, and capital, we've got to be ready for that. So just as the previous gentleman mentioned, workforce is huge, and matching that up. There tends to be, we have found here, in the workforce community, a disconnect generally between the training effort that takes a lot of people who have been laid off and have been having trouble getting employment, a disconnect between that on the one hand and the precise and very detailed type of skill sets that growing manufacturers need. And they don't need it in a few years. They need it in 6 months once they build, or they need it in 3 months because they've gotten a new customer. So that whole thing is there. And then lastly, our St. Paul Harbor, which runs over 5 million tons of goods in and out of the harbor, that actually provides a lot of exports and also brings in product to the benefit of the entire state and region. We need harbor expansion, and the critical upgrade need there is infrastructure. Most of our dock walls that service the private sector companies along the edge of the river were built in the WPA days. And even those that weren't built in the 30s, that were built in the 50s and 60s, are well past their asset life. So we need infrastructure for the harbor. It isn't talked about very much, but absolutely for new dock wall infrastructure and for the reconstruction of the very aged ones, that is critical for manufacturers. And we have about 35 of them just in our relatively small harbor that are plying the river, using the river as a transportation mode. And so those would be my comments. Thank you, Ken.
Great. Thanks, all of you, for that. We're going to take one more question and do a go-around and let folks, and we're going to start with David Miskey on this one from Milwaukee. David, if you could talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you all are employing in the Milwaukee area to bring new manufacturing and manufacturing jobs to your region.
Sure, and I'm glad you said Milwaukee area, because that's what I want to kind of focus on just for a minute or two. We historically, Milwaukee had been treating itself as just the only game in town, when there were a number of other counties around us and other communities, and we had to stop thinking in such a way and start looking at it a little more regionally. And so one of the things that was established about 7 or 8 years ago was this agency that we call the Milwaukee 7. And the 7 constitutes 7 counties that are, including Milwaukee, that surround Milwaukee. And it was to really concentrate our economic development efforts going forward as a 7-county area, as opposed to just county by county or community by community. And one of the first things that agency did, the Milwaukee 7 did, was identify some industry clusters. And one of them that came out of that study, the initial study, was that we had a real strong emphasis of businesses and manufacturers in the Milwaukee region that dealt with water. And what came out of that then was what we call the Milwaukee Water Council. And because we're located on such a large freshwater body, that and recognizing that there are over 140 companies that exist in the Milwaukee region that deal with fresh water or clean water or water filtration, companies like Badger Meter or A.O. Smith, companies that have significant presence or have their world headquarters right here in our region. And so the idea was to bring these companies together and have again, a concentrated or a concerted effort to attract investment in our region based around the water initiative. And hopefully some of you have seen that start to pay off in our community. We're getting some good press nationally about this concept. And so it's one way that we see businesses either organically growing in our region or in attracting national or international companies to our region because of the high concentration of water businesses that are located here. One of the other clusters that was identified in the initial study by this Regional Economic Development Organization was the energy, power, and control. And it was a lot of engineering companies, a lot of energy investment or engineering investment that was located here in our region. And so similar to the Milwaukee Water Council, a different agency was created in the last few years called the Midwest Energy Research Consortium. And a very similar concept in that it has about 90 companies in the region, companies like Johnson Controls and Rockwell Automation that deal with energy, power, and control. And so the concept is to become the Midwest leader in energy, power, and control, whereas the Milwaukee Water Council is focused on being the world's leader in water initiatives or water industries. So similar type of industrial or industry clusters, but it's really to bring together these companies, these organizations, created under one organization, and to attract other companies to this region that are focused on those types of industries. So the Midwest Energy Research Consortium, for example, has a number of different states represented, including Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, a few others, but it's really expanding its reach as opposed to just being Milwaukee. And so its idea, just like the Water Council, is to attract investment here in this location, to have the incubator here in Milwaukee, which is what the Milwaukee Water Council has in what they call the Global Water Center. And MWork, or the Energy Research Consortium, similarly wants an incubator here in Milwaukee. And that is all revolving around manufacturing and businesses that deal with those two industry clusters. So I just wanted to share a little bit about how the Milwaukee Regional Economic Development Organization is working with each county, each municipality, and focusing on two industrial clusters, but there are other clusters obviously they're focused on, but those are two of the bigger ones.
Great, thanks David. Let's go to Jeremy Cooney from Rochester, if you can talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you all are employing.
Absolutely. Well, building off of what David said about kind of a regional approach, we've experienced and tried to do the same comprehensive level of partnership. So the City of Rochester and local economic development partners, including the Chamber of Commerce, the County of Monroe, and the State of New York have all collaborated together. In fact, we have a regional business marketing organization called the Greater Rochester Enterprise, or GRE, whose sole mission it is to attract new companies to come to our region, but they are experiencing some of the challenges that we spoke about a few moments ago, including the workforce development issue. But to that point, I should mention that one of our strategies is to really engage with our higher educational partners in our community to do some retraining and to do some preparation programs so that we are educating and training our workforce to meet the new economy. So Monroe Community College is a prominent community college in New York State. We're proud to have it here in the city of Rochester. It's working closely with local manufacturing firms to tailor academic programs to the needs of manufacturing employers. And another example of that, in addition to the community college, is the Rochester Institute of Technology, or RIT, has also recently launched something they call the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship, or CUE. And the CUE is to support the training needs of local employers and workers to meet a more entrepreneurial economy. And by the way, just kind of an interesting side note, the former director of RIT's CUE is now the new Economic Development Commissioner for Mayor Warren in Rochester. I would say, though, probably the most significant strategy that our community is employing is really around building these environments that local government is taking a lead role in finding and creating an inventory of sites for future manufacturing development. And I mentioned Kodak before, a little tongue-in-cheek. Well, part of the bankruptcy proceeding that Kodak went through was to review its property assets, its real property assets. And they have pretty large manufacturing space which didn't need to be maintained by the company. So we bought it, and it's about 400 acres in the city of Rochester, but overall, this old industrial park is about 1,200 acres. It's an old industrial complex. And we renamed it the Eastman Business Park. And this is really an interesting model because it's a self-sufficient manufacturing facility, meaning it's got its own power plant, its own water intake and distribution system, its own industrial sewer system, the whole shebang, which of course brings along some liabilities. But generally, today we've got 35 companies, manufacturing companies, who are part of the Eastman Business Park, above and beyond the new re-emerged Eastman Kodak company. That's about, just to kind of look at space requirements, about 1.5 million square feet of available manufacturing space, laboratory, office, warehouse space, available for companies looking to invest in Rochester, New York, and about 300 acres of prime land, which is available. So we're looking at the Eastman Business Park as a attractive opportunity to really reinvest and target our future manufacturing employers and companies in the city of Rochester.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to bring Maddie Stanislaus into the conversation. Maddie, you've heard a lot of the obstacles folks are facing around the country, some of the strategies that they're employing to accelerate manufacturing. I'd like to ask you how you think the new Investing in Manufacturing Communities partnership can help communities like the ones who are speaking today move to the next level in advancing their manufacturing.
Well, he needed to step out for a minute, but let me just answer on sort of really on behalf of EPA. I mean,
sure.
Really, our whole goal in really working on this initiative was to make sure that previously used sites, brownfield sites, other sites, weren't, sort of set off to the side in the context of communities thinking about manufacturing. We really wanted to make sure that this initiative reflected other administration goals linked to smart growth, linked to site reclamation, linked to vacant property reuse. And so really, we really feel that the manufacturing initiative can really play an important part in communities' efforts to really revitalize their whole, central cities, take advantage of existing infrastructure, really address a number of the things, that everybody has mentioned so far. Reuse infrastructure, sort of restore central city vibrancy, create jobs for people who are living in communities. Maddie, one of his biggest objectives in really pushing for the, the IMCP and structuring it the way it is was, he really viewed it, really to use that term, as a good way to address, environmental justice concerns and community concerns and really help bring benefits back to everybody in the community because you're, going in those kind of places and communities. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ken, or not.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful.
I was trying to flag him. He's running late to a meeting with the administrator, and so
okay.
That was anyway. So
that's great. So we have a couple of technical questions about the RFP, which I want to get to, which Charlie, I think you can answer in a minute. But before we do that,
I have no time constraint, Ken, so I can stay as long as people are.
Yeah, we may go a little past 3 o'clock to take some of these questions today, but not much past. But before we do that, I'd like both Lori Lauder and Tim Kananashu to talk about a little bit of following up on what Charlie just said, but from your community perspective, what role you think that reclaiming underutilized land like brownfields and vacant properties can play in your community efforts to revitalize manufacturing. Lori, you want to start with that, and then we'll go to Tim Kananashu from East Moline.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, as I mentioned before, there's a 20% manufacturing growth lag here in St. Paul. That's a challenge. Another stat just to throw out there, we have a 24% poverty rate in this city. And so the role of reclaiming land is just fundamentally the underpinning of manufacturing growth. You know, we're a fully built city. Industrial manufacturing does not go downtown. It does not go on commercial strips. It doesn't go in between two homes or a cluster of homes. It's in its own space. So I think it is absolutely the underpinning of land reclamation and contamination cleanup and so forth. And of course we know the yield is jobs at great wages, supplier network growth. I think that tends to get forgotten, and I think even we need to pay some more attention to the whole supplier network growth part of the equation. Connection to the available workforce, and of course tax base enhancement. So one of the other things that we think about on this question is that, you know, it's essential to meet manufacturing demand when it happens. And that means being ready. I know the phrase shovel ready has been around for 5, 6 years or more, but you know, it really means being ready. And this means having land ready on which manufacturers can develop their new facilities, and part of that may include financing, maybe not, depending on the credit quality of the company. It also means reusing existing buildings, and that can come in two forms, expanding in place or actually going into leased facilities. And I wanted to give a couple quick examples on that. Here's a real one right along the Mississippi River, just 1/8 of a mile from downtown. An old Citgo tank farm, 25 acres. We had rebranded it years ago to be our River Bend Business Center, right along the Mississippi River. And we recently, just 6 months ago, because of all the land reclamation, because the fact that we had some leased space for this company, we were able to acquire, so to speak. We've just done a transaction with Matsuura Machinery out of Japan, and it is their U.S. presence in the country now. They had some leased space elsewhere. They wanted to grow. I mean, that's just one example. Another example is we 4 years ago took over the former 50-acre 3M World Headquarters and Manufacturing Center. They left. We were left with a huge hole in one of the lowest income neighborhood areas, the east side of St. Paul, in the entire Twin Cities. And one of the things we did, and I want to talk about water, one of the other guys covered it, and it's so important, as we know. And on part of this campus that we took over, that we are now recreating into a viable manufacturing and other industrial center, is state-of-the-art stormwater management system. We've just gotten an international and some state awards for this system. Who was part of that? The St. Anthony Falls Laboratories, which is part of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, literally sitting at St. Anthony Falls in downtown Minneapolis. And they didn't know how to commercialize a baffle that they had invented. And we found out about them. We didn't know what the widget would be to do a very cool new stormwater management system and put some numerics in there, put some measurement tools in there. Well, the bottom line is we built it with their product. Okay, so St. Anthony Falls is called SAFL, S-A-F-L, SAFL. They did a baffle, so I run around the country talking about the SAFL baffle. But seriously, we now that we have numerics, we have saved the Mississippi River, which was being tortured by just raw stormwater going into the river. Now we have a 92% 8.5% savings of that mess going into the river. The other thing is when we finish this redevelopment on very polluted land, I'm happy to say 3M took care of everything they were responsible for. We had to take care of the rest thanks to the EPA and the state. And now at the end of this time when we reach the 1,000 permanent jobs we expect to have our customers do on this site, every single year thereafter, $38.1 million is expected to aggrandize the state's domestic product. And lastly, as an example, we just are on the cusp, I think my board will approve this in a week and a half, of purchasing a downtown vacant store called Macy's that crashed with 3 or 4 other potential deals in the private sector, and it's a brownfield site. So, you know, wherever they are, and it's mostly about manufacturing, but it's also about reclaiming land for some other activities that make some sense. And so those roles about land and cleanup and all of the other pieces we've all talked about can never be forgotten, and we always need to just keep pushing forward, particularly in terms of stormwater management that go along on these manufacturing sites. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lori. And Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about in Moline the connections between reclaiming brownfields and vacant properties and your manufacturing efforts?
Sure. I find it interesting that all 4 of us panelists are located on a river or a lake, and that you know, the thing is that historically manufacturing is located in those types of areas to utilize that water resource as a form of power or transportation, and that the current situation, I believe, in most of these areas environmentally has required a great deal of attention in order to move forward with economic development. And that before I go on, I have to let Lori know that I'm on mile mark 479 in the Mississippi River, and I appreciate her efforts. But
and thank you. And I wish I could tell you what mile marker I'm on, but the guy down the hall knows.
Yeah. But anyway, Lori touched on some those things, and I think that Dave did also, that if we can reclaim these types of land, that we're going to have a cleaner environment, and that as we examine our land usage and planning, that as we have done here in the Mississippi, I had a conversation, I believe yesterday, with a panel that for about a 12 or 15 mile segment, that's all you saw on the riverfront was manufacturing, and today it's not even half of that. So we're taking back the river so that we can utilize it, because it's a big attraction. It provides a lot of tourism. There's a lot of recreation, and that we actually get to use our river and enjoy it. At the same time, we can look at, is the best place for a manufacturing site where it's located, like on the river or whatever, but the reuse of those existing building and facilities and transportation services, it may reduce the overall cost of actually putting somebody into place. So I'm going to make it real brief and short and leave it at that. That you know, some of the others have talked about regionalization and collaboration, and to me those are very important things in terms of planning as well as the outcomes and the ability to move forward. So that's
Great.
it.
Thanks to Tim, Jeremy, Lori, and David. Great comments. Obviously, you guys all have a lot going on in your communities, and with leaders like you all in place, I think the future for the revitalization of manufacturing is quite bright in the country. So with that, we have a couple of questions from our audience. Charlie, which I'd like to pose to you. First one is, how important is it for to be eligible for Phase 2 for the current manufacturing communities designation to have been awarded a Phase 1 project?
Well, the information that EDA has, I mean, you do not have to be a planning grant winner to be competitive for this new designation. The new designation is, it is not looking for planning resources. I mean, you're looking for implementation resources. Phase 1 was a plan, and there's no sort of competitive advantage to that first batch that won. I know that there's been some misinformation out there on this. I've heard a couple people say that, you know, things like only the Phase 1 winners can apply for Phase 2. That's just not correct. I mean, you know, Phase 1 was intended to help facilitate along with the grants that we had. It was intended to facilitate communities planning for preparation for manufacturing, but it is not. Phase 2 is not contingent on that, and I mean, I just can't say that strongly enough. Actually, Ken, while I have a chance too, you know, I think I may have mentioned this at the beginning, but you know, if other people have questions that occur to them, you know, either after we run out of time or we don't get to all the questions, you know, if you could just compile them and get them to me. I am meeting with EDA and the White House tomorrow. We're going to start sort of mapping out the process, and one of the points that I want to raise is that we really need to have a good sort of communications system in place somehow to answer these kind of inquiries. I mean, this is a complicated Federal Register notice. I mean, it's not a typical EDA notice. I mean, it really is kind of unique the way, and maybe that's sort of one of the byproducts or whatever of so many agencies participating and putting it together. But, you know, I think there's going to be questions come up, and it's certainly my goal at EPA to make sure that as many of our sort of site-focused, brownfield-focused communities as possible are competitive in this process. So, I mean, so any technical questions, so I guess I've beaten this horse pretty strongly, but it may still have a whimper of life in it. So I'll just say if you can just kind of get those to us. I mean, I want to get those, you know, passed along and answered.
So I'm going to suggest that if anybody has questions that you would like answered, technical questions that we don't get to today, because we're going to give Charlie all the questions that we get today on the webinar, but you can email them to Ken, K-E-N, at NALGEP.org. And we will pass those on to make sure Charlie has those. The next question, Charlie, is, will regional efforts be viewed more favorably than an effort involving a single community? I'm
going to answer that this way, and let me just say, I'm going to caveat some of this by saying that some of the competitive process fine print has still to be finalized, but I'm going to answer that question this way. It was clearly the intent when this was put together that it would really promote, you know, regional and multi-jurisdictional and multi-partner efforts. So I think the answer to that would be, you know, a broader effort would be more competitive. Now, that's not to say if you're a large city and you're pulling together a lot of, you know, sort of sub-city entities and universities, you know, that a single city, you know, wouldn't be competitive. But clearly, the idea was to encourage, you know, multi-jurisdictional / regional efforts in this to really attract manufacturing to an area as opposed to a city.
Okay, great. Next question is, I heard a lot of demonstrating community buy-in, commitment, integration, as well as describing a strategy to promote the growth of manufacturing. How specific does that strategy need to be? Do we need to identify specific sites, or can the strategy focus on a broader region?
That question I want to pass along to EDA because I don't want to provide any inadvertent misinformation on that. You know, I know in general that the more specific, you know, the ideas in the proposal about what is in place and what needs to be done and what would sort of, you know, really sort of shore up and enhance opportunities, the more specific that information is, the better. You know, part of that information also needs to focus on some of the supply chain and sort of competitive manufacturing advantage, you know, stuff. But I think I want to get a little clearer guidance on that one.
Okay. Is this program only available to communities with a brownfield site?
No, it is actually one of the things. It is available to any community in the country that has, as it says on the Federal Register notice, the strong manufacturing base, has identified partners. I mean, one of the things, this does not exclusively focus on distressed areas. Actually, and let me just actually throw in a couple of things that are sort of related. One of the things that we still need to get a decision on from EDA attorneys is how all of the partners and players are going to be viewed. It was our working assumption that the applicant needed to be EDA eligible, but that applicant could partner with a range of other entities who might not be. And so we still need to get that worked out. But I think going back to your question, when Commerce put this together, the focus was on manufacturing-ready communities, and it was really our driving sort of objective at EPA to make sure that brownfield sites and distressed communities and vacant property, sort of proficient communities, were able to compete for these designations. I also want to point out one other thing too, that I know Matty mentioned this when he went through it, but I want to also mention this again, just so people understand what they're competing for at this point in time. I mean, they're competing for designation as a manufacturing community, and the idea is that up to 12 of those communities will be designated. In terms of actual cash funding, it is contingent on appropriation. Now, I have not seen the Commerce language in the budget agreement. This was part of a new appropriation, but I'm guessing there's not much there this year for this. I don't know that. People need to check that out and obviously make their own decisions on this. But what will happen is, at such point in time as funding for this becomes available, it will be those dozen designees that will be eligible to go after it. I mean, they're not going to open up a big competition again for this year on this. So that's one thing to remember. Matty also mentioned the preference and priority. To me, as sort of a recent bureaucrat, but certainly a person who's played around interagency stuff for many, I'm going to say decades, it's actually a pretty exciting concept that we're trying to get in place. I mean, this idea that different agencies will provide some sort of special consideration through their programs, to kind of go after this common goal of enhancing manufacturing opportunities. I mean, to me, if this can work, this to me is a really important benefit. And then also, the federal points of contact as well. I mean, there, the opportunity to have sort of a one-point person that can be helpful to kind of, if do nothing else, help connect the dots with some of the other agencies. So I just wanted to get that point out there as well too, so people know, exactly what's on the line right now with this.
In my experience, Charlie, for these kinds of programs is that the designation can be a very good calling card, and it's, in many ways, it's what the community makes of it.
Well, that is totally on point, Ken. I mean, one of the things when we've had our discussions in the White House work group, to talk about what are communities really getting out of this, I mean, a big part of it is just what you said. I mean, these communities are going to be able to, as investment prospects come in, as communities become aware of the opportunities to attract manufacturing investment, and this is going to also be linked to the Select USA initiative that Commerce is launching, which is an initiative that's intended to try to help facilitate direct foreign investment in new facilities in the U.S. I mean, these communities are going to be able to say this. We are a federally designated manufacturing-ready community. And so, I mean, it's hard to say what value that may have. And you're right. I mean, some of that will depend on how the communities play it out. But I think that there's, even though there may not be a lot of cash dollars on the line right now, I think there's some important benefits that can come out of this.
Let's see. I think we're going to stop right there. We've gone close to an hour and 15 minutes. We've answered most of the questions. For those questions that we didn't answer, the ones that are related to the RFP, we will pass those on through Charlie to the interagency working group so that they can be answered. I'd like to thank Maddie Stanislaus and Charlie Barch from EPA for your time, for providing all the information. I'd like to thank our 4 panelists from communities around the country for sharing their expertise and experiences in manufacturing. So, and if anybody wants to follow up with NALGEP, please feel free to give myself a call, and contact information is on the website. And finally, the slides and the webinar recording will be available on the NALGEP website at www.nalgep.org. So thanks, everybody, for participating today. We had a great crowd, and we will speak with you soon. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I just want to mention one last thing. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first effort by any agency to do this kind of organized outreach on this initiative, so I do want to thank you and NALGEP for putting this together.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Charlie, again.
Okay.
You, Charlie. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.